Is the Ganga a living person? Very interesting topic. Thank you for giving it to me, Manojji and Himanshuji. This is an old painting. This is not the Ganga, but I'm starting with this painting, which is a kind of cornucopia, as in a representation of a habitat that's full of life. And as we go forward, this is an old Mughal painting. As we go forward, I'm going to argue that what makes Ganga living is its cornucopia of life. It's the life forms that it contains. So there was a landmark judgment in 2017 by the Uttarakhand High Court, which basically said that the Ganga, the Yamuna and its tributaries and every stream is a living entity. What does that really mean? We're going to try to unpack that word. But more interestingly, what does it mean for governance? What does it mean for actual implementation? So there were people who were named to be the parents of this living entity because the living entity cannot speak. And arguably, the parents, have been responsible historically for the destruction of the river. So a lot of people said that these so-called parents, who are the chief secretary, the AG, etc., and the director of a central government scheme for the Ganga, were named to be the parents. What really does it mean when we say something is a living entity? There are two aspects. An entity is something that has identity. So a tiger will be an entity. A chair will not be an entity. A chair also has identity, but if you are a living entity, you are supposed to have more of a moral fulcrum, and the rest of society is supposed to have more of a moral fulcrum towards you. And it is existing. So existing is what the Oxford Dictionary describes a being to be. So a state of life is therefore valued more by society, by language, by philosophy, by jurisprudence than a state of not living or being dead. I decided to put this tag cloud together to kind of revisit some of the words that have been used to describe this very unique river. So the many words and adjectives people have used have been aviral. A lot of people have said ma and many derivations of ma, the mother, sacred. Some people have said habitat to a lesser extent. Many people have talked about how Ganga is a miracle, how it does not putrefy. And the idea really then becomes that we are looking at this river through a philosophy and a cultural aspect, which sets it apart from other rivers. And perhaps that is something, the cultural baggage that we have for this so-called miraculous river is what informs the judicial precedent that was set. I spoke about how living things are considered to have more value than non-living, and value or worth for something. And when we are trying to understand what we value as a society, oftentimes when something is not human, and I'm relying here on theories of sentience for animals, is we move towards something first by giving it worth, as you can see, second by personifying something. So personification is the act of making something look like a human being. So calling a Ganga a woman and a mother, for example, is a very classic example of personification. And then the next step would be to make it a person. So a lot of people, for example, conservation biologists who work on species which are sentient, such as elephants, will always say an elephant is a person. So they personify it, and we also personify the Ganga very often in the way that we talk about her. Going to some of the other judicial precedents in the world, Ecuador recognizes the rights of nature, so that was back in 2011. There is New Zealand, where a stretch of the river has been given its own name. It's called the Te Awa Tupua, which means having legal rights. So if you hurt the river, you're hurting a person. So like if somebody comes and slaps me, I have the right to go and file an FIR against that person. And if somebody goes and harms the river, then there are legal rights vested for somebody to represent that the river has been hurt, and therefore some action needs to be taken. Bolivia recognized the laws of Mother Earth. There are several other countries that have recognized non-humans to be having rights like a human being. For example, there's an entire body of work that tries to give human rights to great apes or gorillas and some other species. There's been talk in India about whether the elephant needs to be given a slightly different kind of right, not just as a wild animal. It's interesting, I'm just going to rush through this because no time, but for the New Zealand judgment, this is something that the representative of the tribe said. He said, we cannot consider the river to be a living entity if we do not look at it as an indivisible whole. So we've spoken about this constantly. I think Manoj Ji was the first one who talked about cuts and pricks on the river. We spoke yesterday about how you cannot piece something together if you don't know what the pieces are. So integrity, ecological integrity, the idea of having the right to have a head, a torso, and a tail in some kind of way that lets the character be, becomes important for giving rights of life to that thing. I want to quickly go through some Indian judicial precedents. So what does the court say about wild animals? The court says about wild animals that they have fera naturae, meaning they have the right to go where they want. They have rights of privacy, of freedom, of free ranging, and very interestingly, our own law, the Wildlife Protection Act, does not say that animals are owned by us. It is only the dead animal, the dead body of an animal, which is owned by the state. Otherwise, if an elephant hurts you, you do not have the right to hurt it back unless it is in self-defense and if your life is in danger. So that is another thing, that's another way in which we understand the non-human in India. Very interesting judgment. This is a piece I did back in 2013. The lion is an Indian, not a Gujarati. It's a very landmark judgment which said that we need to look at nature not through an anthropocentric lens, but through an ecocentric lens. What does it mean? It means that decisions for nature need to consider what is good for nature and not what is good for us. So looking at a river as a resource, for example, and not looking at the ecological needs of the river would be an anthropocentric way. It would be a resource and management way, but not a way that is setting a good standard for the river. But coming back to the question of really what does it mean for a river like a Ganga to be alive? There are many beautiful mascots for this river that have captured culture, imagination, and even politics. So the national aquatic animal, the Gangetic dolphin, beleaguered but still worshipped or still considered to be valuable, worthy, because it's considered to be sentient, more than just a wild animal, and because it's considered to be a flagship for this great river. Right. But you also have a host of other species. You have gharials, you have skimmers, you have a lot of life happening that is utilizing the habitat that the river sends. Talking a little bit about what was raised in the last 2 days. There's something that the river needs, which is river space. And if we look at what that means as legal rights, that would mean privacy. That would mean freedom to flood its banks, to be able to transgress the boundaries that we set for it. And it would perhaps mean some form of positive discrimination, like the fera naturae, that there is a right for it to be free and to be wild and to be non-human. Ecological flow is another one. I'm sorry, I don't have time to go through this. I'll just rush through this, but finally we come to the question of how do we really represent something that is seen to be alive? Because it's not just enough to give rights to somebody. There are, even in human societies, there are several groups or communities which do not have the agency to speak. How do we give agency? How do we give representation? This is sentient, these are sentient studies that look at giving agency and representation to non-humans, and they argue that committees or groups that make decisions need to have representations of the non-human on it. So somebody needs to represent the voice of the non-human that cannot speak. I'll have to go, I'm sorry, I have to rush through this. But what really could be the recommendations for governance? I mean, the Ganga really is a living entity for all of us, but not in real life. Also because there's been a stay on the order, and also because our governance and our politics don't seem to at all see her as worthy of life. And the recommendations for governance really would be better parents to start with. So parents or legal guardians are people who are supposed to speak for our best interest because we cannot speak or we do not have the comprehension to speak. Looking at the sentence studies that we just saw, it would be good to have representations from different communities, whether it's a fishing community, whether it's even somebody speaking for the cornucopia of life, the dolphin, the mahaseed, the snow trout. And Ganga finally is not a living person without her umbrella of life. So taking away that life, that ecological diversity, that biological diversity would mean sacrificing and giving up that life. There is something known as a species best interest standard that was emphasized in the Lion judgment of 2013. I would suggest that we need a Ganga best interest standard that looks at the best interest of the river over and above the best interest that we set for our own selves. Thank you. I'm so sorry I had to rush through, but no choice.
I'm also sorry for making all the speakers rush through, but thank you, Neha for this, both for sticking to the time and for bringing out some very, very important insights, even though you had to truncate your presentation. Let's have a couple of quick questions or comments, but very brief if they are comments, and then we'll go to the next presentation.
No questions.
Hello. Yeah, thanks. Excellent presentation here.
Thank you.
You see, this is something which actually exists. We can see it.
Yeah.
Whereas, for us today, Google is everything. But can we see Google? Does Google exist? It exists only either in the laptop or in our mind. It doesn't really exist. You cannot touch Google. You can touch Ganga. So that is something which really gives it the legitimacy to be treated as a person. Unfortunately, I find that a lot of people, they are very diffident about giving this kind of a, while they are very fine with having trusts or having something like Google, they find it very difficult to treat somebody other than human as living,
human, yeah.
which is really very difficult. On the other hand, when you treat something as living or give it life, it results into getting some rights. And the experiences, at least in Indian context, we have so many laws, but the problem is with their implementation. But wherever we are given rights to something, rights, things have happened. So there is a talk of having a Ganga bill or Ganga act, but I'm convinced that things will happen for Ganga only when the act incorporates rights for Ganga within it.
Thank you so much.
And Samir, you had only two right now.
Yeah, excellent presentation. Congratulations. I just have comments, not this thing. So, quick one, whether this house can consider now or later adopting or at least acknowledging there's the Universal Declaration of Rights of Rivers prepared by the Earth Law Center. So one could look at that and see whether whether groups in India would like to sign on to that. And to some of the organizing committee members, I have circulated the rights of rivers which have been drafted by civil society for Serbia and for Ecuador. Sorry, not Ecuador, Serbia and Ethiopia. I could circulate that to further people, and perhaps some of those could be used for our Ganga bill, which is proposed. I'm not saying we have to copy it, body, but there are some interesting concepts in those laws which we could try and adapt to Indian circumstances. Thank you.